Hello and welcome to Phoenix Gaming. I am your host, Nick Henning, and today we're going to talk about tier lists. Now, tier lists are a pretty useful tool that you can use in a lot of kinds of gaming. We're going to talk about video games first because this is where I originally came up with the idea of this video, but tier lists show up in board gaming a lot, particularly in games that have sort of lists of different unique cards, which is a really popular genre of board games these days, in order to try to figure out kind of what pick lists are or preference orders, or games that have factions and other kinds of systems where you might choose certain characters. Obviously, in video games, primarily we use it for playing the right character in the right instances. Maybe it's for weapons or something like that. But I think that tier lists can be a distraction. They can teach you the wrong heuristics about a game, or really the wrong lessons in terms of what power is meant to be. And obviously, there are a couple different lessons that we need to consider in terms of using tier lists, because I don't think that they're necessarily a bad tool or, more than anything, a bad conversation starter, but I do think it's a mistake when they become a conversation finisher. And we're going to kick right off with Mobile Legends Bang Bang, which is the game that got me to think about this video. So for those of you who don't know, Mobile Legends Bang Bang is kind of like League of Legends. This is a 5 versus 5 team play game that you could play online. This game specifically plays on your phone, which I like because if I'm feeling depressed at a board, I could just stay in bed and play. And usually the games take about 20 minutes, and you are 5 versus 5, so the team composition really matters a lot. But at the level that I play at, really kind of the individual characters and how well you're doing is kind of the most that you can control. You're not going to have a lot of communication with your teammates. I do play ranked mode for those of you who do care, and I'm at the legend level, which means that I'm pretty decent at this game for having played for just a couple months, but I'm not going to be on any esports thing anytime soon, which is a completely reasonable place to be. The game has hundreds and hundreds of characters that are in different classes, and specifically the character that made me think about this is there's a class in the game called Marksman. Marksman is not generally my specialty in playing these games, but I'm actually pretty okay at playing it. I play a character called Hanabi. She throws a little like shuriken thing, and my win rate with that character is the highest win rate I have in any character in the whole game, at something like 75%, which is absurd because generally you're expecting a win rate of about 50%. My overall win rate in this game is like 53%, and that was enough to get me to legend for whatever reason. This character, if you look at Mobile Legends tier lists, which I'll show you here, let's slide out of your way. Nabi is all the way at the bottom here in C tier. And this isn't just one random list that I pulled up, pretty widely regarded as one of the lowest characters in this game in terms of her capabilities. And I think part of the reason for that is that she maybe is lacking sort of the mobility of some of the other AD carries, can't get herself out of jams. But for me, this part doesn't actually matter. The reason why Hanabi is the character that I play is because she plays to my strengths as when I'm playing the Marksman class. So what I'm good at in playing the Marksman class is kind of like hanging back, not making aggressive plays, and then just sort of like piling on the damage over a long period of time and just kind of very consistently producing a bunch of damage, pushing the main game objectives. But I'm not a playmaker. I'm not very good at playing an aggressive version of this class. I always do. If I do, I end up dying. And so a lot of these other classes really reward high skill players who are making these strong, aggressive plays. But that doesn't suit my playstyle. When I try these S or A tier characters, I end up doing significantly worse than with the character that I really like playing. And so part of understanding tier lists is understanding your preferences. And to segue this into board games, I want to talk about how this matters, which is really about context. Okay, so why are we handicapping ourselves with these tier lists? First of all, it's because there's a lot going on here, right? We're going to use Arnak in our example here. If you haven't played the game, that's okay. I'm still going to be able to make this something that is going to make some sense to you. But cards have costs, which in Arnak is going to be the coins in the bottom left corner. Cards have victory points, which in Arnak is the purple number in the bottom right corner. They have their abilities, which in Arnak is just where you think all the abilities would be in most card games. And then sometimes they have bonus stuff as well, which is in the top left corner of these cards. And it's not as important in Arnak as it might be in some other games that have multi-use cards or anything like that. But that's a lot of vectors of information, and people are not realistically capable of holding and organizing all this information in their heads to assess how good a card is. In fact, time and time again in the Magic world or other kind of card games worlds, we see that people consistently make wrong predictions, even having seen hundreds of thousands of examples of cards in advance because of the context of what those cards are doing in games, or just kind of misunderstanding what's powerful about something over and over and over again. It's not bad or reflecting that we haven't done anything with it. It's that it's hard to just conceptually analyze some cards and get to the answer of what things look like. But we still want to be able to have sort of like a starting, I don't know, maybe system or heuristic that we can look. And so I think that a lot of times we like tier lists because we're hoping for something that tells us sort of a raw power level. What is this card doing? How powerful is it? And this tier list isn't picking on anyone in particular. If you Google Arnak tier list, you'll find this. It is the average of some number of people that have submitted their tier lists, who knows what their credentials are, but it's honestly not a terribly bad tier list, but it does have some problems associated with it, and that's primarily because it doesn't have context, right? You care a lot about different cards in different ways, based on what you're trying to accomplish at various different stages in the game. So we're going to take a few examples and just tear this tier list apart, which again, I started off by saying is not that bad. In terms of their abilities, just primarily how I would read this tier list, I think that it's mostly okay. And a lot of the cards on here kind of sit where they want to. But what I want to talk about is this supposed to be on turn 1? Turn 2, turn 3, turn 4, or turn 5? Because in Arnak, which is a 5-turn game, on the 5th turn of the game, I basically don't care about anything. Dog, which is probably like a well agreed upon S tier card, I think would make it to S tier on almost anybody's item list, is actually trash at the end of the game. It's one of the worst cards that you can buy in the entire deck. And so, does it still count as S tier if buying it on turn 5 makes a mistake? Similarly, Grappling Hook here, which people despise, is one of the best cards that you can buy on the last turn of the game because it's 2 coins for 2 points. And people just look at it and say, ugh, Grappling Hook, I can't deal with that. And they make the mistake of leaving kind of good cards or valuable resources available and in play over the course of the game. So that one might be one that you've thought about before, that the context of the timing of when you're getting these cards really makes a big difference. But Arnak has a lot of expansions now, and it's got a 2-sided board even in the base game that has different reward structures along the way. A really great example here is our friend Pickaxe, which is an amazing card on the bird map, because on the bird map you have lots of compasses, you have a lot of need for tablets and arrowheads. And that's not to say that it's bad on the other maps, but on Snakeside, which is just the other base map that you can start with, it's significantly weaker. It's not, all the way down at C tier or something like that, but it isn't straight up an S tier card. It's not a card that you necessarily would throw away a turn to get while you're playing on the snake side of the map. Same thing goes for our friend Carrier Pigeon over here, because you really need this on a map that needs a lot of tablets. And so you would want to look and see what your circumstances are of whether there's a need for tablets. And a lot of the games you're going to play are going to have that, but that doesn't mean that every single one of them is going to. So caring about the timing of it, caring about the conditions in which the game is playing. Also, honestly, personal playstyle makes a difference here. For instance, I am unique in Arnak in that I like buying cards. If you've watched any of my Arnak strategy guides, I buy more points worth of cards than the average player, the average winner on Board Game Arena by a pretty fair margin. And that means that I have a little bit more flexibility in putting garbage into my deck, like our friend Grappling Hook, because I'm less likely to draw back into these garbage cards as I make this deck bigger and bigger. So your playstyle can also sort of inform what it is that you're doing throughout the course of the game that should change the way that you evaluate what these tiers look like. And so, admittedly, when a lot of creators make these tier lists, they'll talk about why a card is put into a particular space. But this idea of, are we talking about at the beginning? Are we talking about the middle or the end or the average of them? And if we're talking about something like the average of them, is it even really that helpful? Because we're not actually talking about what we should be talking about, which is what I'm focusing on at the various aspects of the game and how to evaluate cards in that given structure. We also need to acknowledge that tier lists are unbelievably bad. They can be really, really awful and poorly informed throughout sort of the course of everything. Part of it might be data. It might be that we're looking at kind of win rates, right, in video games, win rates of players in the top leagues, which is probably what's informing exactly what I was talking about earlier, that Mobile Legends Bang Bang list, where I am performing at a completely different level than the people who are at the top tiers. I can't play like them, and the game is not appropriately designed for them. In the Magic world, this is sort of an interesting conversation. Is the game designed for casual players, or is the game designed for competitive professional players? And frankly, Magic's philosophy has changed about this over the course of the past couple of decades. And so you can't even look at the cards anymore anyway and be able to answer that question because the focus and the priority has changed over time. So part of it is that data is bad and the structure and what our goals are is kind of suspicious. What are we looking at in comparison? Are we looking at just average win rates across everybody? Well, should I really consider these if it's my first time playing? Should I consider it if it's my 100th time playing? I probably know better than the average person playing the game. And I think that actually might be an example of what came up in this Root tier list here. Root is a really cool game with different factions in it that play completely asymmetrically, have totally different powers from each other, different scoring systems, and everything like that. And it is played by a ton of people. And the problem with games like Root is that how the game breaks down in a public tournament setting versus in your home tournament setting versus like on an online ranking board setting, they're all completely different. I mean, looking at this list here, if you play Root, you have to be cackling. The idea of Badgers here being D tier is an absolute joke. They are one of the most powerful factions of this game with such a high scoring ceiling, but they are pretty hard to play. And so this might be a reflection, I think, of folks that have not played the game quite enough. Cats being at A tier is also pretty laughable as far as I'm concerned in any community that I've seen. It's not that cats are unplayable or anything like that. It's just that when it comes to those militant factions, they're definitely just not as flexible as a lot of the other factions that are on this list here. And I could go on and on about which ones of these I think are correct or incorrect. The really great example here is Otters. So I'm suggesting that when you consider tier lists, you should be putting them in the context of how you play the game, what's important in the game, and evaluating them. If you are looking at a tier list for a way to jumpstart your strategy journey, you should be looking for folks who are talking about why things are put in various places. And that's fine, again, as a conversation starter to get you somewhere. I might look at a tier list like this, and it's not so interesting to talk about why Credit Core is in the S tier slot, because anybody who's played the game a handful of times might have seen the incredible power and flexibility of such a faction. But you might be curious, like why you have Unme rated in the B slot. Some people think this faction is really, really low tier, and it's kind of rated mid here. So what's the thinking behind that? Is it higher for you or lower for me? Or how does it play in a game of base game versus playing on various other maps that or various different other expansions? Is it better in one context or the other? In a 5-player base game, Unme might actually be one of the better factions out there, and that's the kind of conversation that we want to be having with each other. Also, I haven't played with all of these factions here because I've played a number of Terraforming Mars expansions, but not all of them. But like Utopia here, which is rated at the bottom of the list, on paper, doesn't look so terrible to me at first. 40 money to start off with, 5 production in terms of metals, right? But a kind of weird ability that you can sacrifice your production to gain 4 of that resource immediately. Yeah, I can see why you wouldn't want to do that at the beginning of the game, but a couple instances where I might do it on the first couple turns, and I'm absolutely doing it pretty much every turn from, turn 4 onward until the end of the game. So I'd be curious to talk to people who had played with Utopia before to learn why is that faction, rated as lowly as it is in comparison to something that I really hate, like Robinson Industries, which I have played a handful of times. And the reality is that not having that much autonomy or choice over what my production increase is means that I just end up having a smorgasbord, messy play pattern rather than a kind of focused linear game plan that tends to be a little bit stronger in Terraforming Mars. So having these conversations and then extending them to other people is, I think, where the tool of a tier list comes into play. Just make sure that you aren't looking at them as kind of the end-all, be-all. I don't think most people do this, but it comes up every once in a while, and I think it's worth making sure that you're putting your own evaluation system into play while you're considering these conversations. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like,